Welcome back over here to the fireplace mantle build. If you haven't been following along, here's a little glimpse of what you missed. So now that you're caught up to speed on where we're at this stage in the build, we can start the beginnings of our overmantle. And this is where it gets tricky, but it gets fun as well. So the first component of that is our side panel. And there's a couple things we need to figure out before we get into it. And I've already figured them out prior to starting here today. And thankfully I did, because it was a lot of layout. Let me show you what I'm talking about. You can see in our frieze here, we've got 3 triglyphs. Those are not gonna stay there. That was just me kind of just playing around with stuff. The overmantle really consists of everything over that. So as we go up here, you can see I have lines where the TV would be, and then you see I have this double cross-setted detail. So I was playing around with kind of 2 layouts here. On the left, you can see there's a frieze incorporated with a triglyph, but on the right, I skipped the frieze and architrave and jumped straight to cornice. Now, because of the height of this room, we're gonna go with this left side here. But what I want you to realize is that for me to wrap this side panel, I needed to know this because I need to know where that side panel was gonna get cut off and picked up by all this heavy trim up top. So figuring out all these details allows me to know where that's gonna happen. As we turn the corner here, you'll follow my lines. And with my proper reveals that I want, you can see I already have my side panel laid out. So my side panel will match in layout the bottom panel here, the raised panel. However, it will not be a raised panel. It'll be a recessed kind of like flat panel, and you'll see this as we build here today, and it'll also have a wallpaper incorporated into it. Like I said, I have that first panel already laid out in pencil, so all I have to do is copy that. I essentially have my cut list ready to go for me, and we can start building. And to get started with this, we're gonna rip some 3/16 plywood down. These are just strips to shim out our Windsor boards for our stiles and rails. So I'm cutting the stiles and rails here, and these are our true 3/4 inch Windsor boards, and with that 3/16 backing, it's going to build these out to 15/16 of an inch. And the whole purpose of that is so our pencil molding application works out. And we're going to rip our stiles down. I'm cutting these out of 1x4s and then ripping them down to 3 inches and 2 1/4. And then I'll cut my rails right here. And my rails were ripped out of 1x4s as well, and those actually stayed 1x4s. So then with those cut, we can go ahead and get our Castle machine going to put the pocket holes in them. And once I have pocket holes in rails, then they'll screw to stiles, and then we can have our first panel built right here for this side of the mantle. And once I have this built, I'll lay it down on its face, and then those plywood strips that I ripped out can now go on the back and build this out to thicken it up. So this is just a real simple way to kind of build it out. So I can now get this in place and get it screwed in. And for this entire build, I'm using 2-inch trim head screws. Side panel is now installed for the overmantle build, and addressing the panel is going to be different than down here. So down here we have a raised panel. Up here we will have a recessed panel. And here is a side profile view of that molding, and that's what I'm going to use as my panel molding to run around inside my panel here. So I've got my pieces here just back from the miter saw. We're going to do a dry fit right here and make sure everything is good to go. There's a look at that trim right there. If I can get this to focus, there we go. So it all checks out. It's all looking good. And man, those profiles just look good. That can be pushed in more, but of course, you know, I haven't glued it yet. So this is good to go for glue. I'll pop this back out, put some glue on those miters, and then we can send it home with some 18 gauge brad nails. And with that installed, we can begin working on our face panel. This will be a flat panel made out of a 1x14 that I'm gonna have to glue up myself. So I'm running this 1x12 across the joiner to get a glue surface that I'll join with a 1x4. You can see the back of this 1x12 was used to cut the beams on the ceiling for the same room that we're working in. It's like a sacrificial piece, but still looks good on the face. So I'm laying out for dominoes here. I'm gonna be using dominoes to help me align this, so when I glue it up in the clamps, I don't even have to think about if it's flush or not. And once the joint is cured, we can remove it from the clamps. And then I always like to hit these kind of joints with an orbital sander because you can do it a lot easier when it's on a table like this. And then once I hit it and kind of get that feathered out, I'll shoot it with some primer just so I can see really what's going on, make sure it checks out. Then I'll flip it on its face and then pin that 3/16 plywood to the back of it. This is an oversized piece. It's the same length, but it's a wider width because I still need to rip this board down because I made it a little oversized so I can get it to the perfect width that I want. So I'll rip it with the plywood pinned to the back of it on the table saw. So I can make one rip and knock out both materials with it pinned in place. So with the flat panel assembled, I can bring it over to my mantle, set it in place, and mark out where the notches need to go for this cross-setted corner detail. So these notches aren't going to be like dead on, and they don't need to be because the 1x2 back band that wraps around that detail will hide any gap. So I'll get this laid out and squared up with the square just for my cut lines, and then once I got that laid out, I'll just X out the waste, and then you can see what needs to come out. And this will be done just with a jigsaw. So pretty simple process on that. And once that's in place, I have the marks for my sconce hole, and I'll use a hole dozer and just cut out exactly where that sconce needs to go. So with that cut out, that is all I need as far as modifications to this panel to now install it. So we'll bring it in, set it in place, and then what I want you to notice here is that it will tuck behind my back band. So there won't be any visible gap. You can see that, how it slides behind that little back band trim piece. And with that in place, I'll just put one screw at the bottom, plumb it up, make sure it's good for our pencil molding application, and then put some more screws in it. Again, using trim head screws to send this thing home. So you can see there that kind of rough cut for the notch doesn't really matter because that 1x2 back band is gonna cover right over that. And then here you can see my pencil molding on my wainscot below, and this is now prepped for the pencil molding in the corner here as well. That's the whole point of shimming out this 1x. And we did receive our sconces that are going to be installed on this mantelpiece, so I'm just unboxing those here. And I'm going to go ahead and get those in because I kind of just want to see how it looks. I'm a very visual person. I probably will have to remove these when it comes to paint, but for now they're not going to be in the way at all. So now that I have my flat side panels on, I can move to the freeze board, and again I'll have to shim out the 1x to get it flush with the existing panels. And like I install everything on this project, we're going to use trim head screws to get this in. So we're flush here of course, and this is ready to be installed. Now that that freeze board is in, we can go ahead and continue back band up and around. So I'm gonna head out to the miter saw, slice and dice these pieces up here, and we'll get these popped in. So if you recall, when we put this wainscot together, we only put one component of the cap in. There's a couple reasons for that. Number one, we were going to drop our panels in, our flat panel and side panel here. We knew we'd have this seam that we'd have to hide. And number two, I didn't even know what I was using at the time. So now that I have this in place, I've been playing with my Windsor bag and I landed on this. This is a picture molding. See, it has that big bead at the top. You would hook wires on here that hold pictures, and then you can move your pictures around the house. This would be installed near the top of the ceiling, and that's the whole purpose of this molding. So this is the front profile. I'm going to be using this in a very unorthodox way, because what I've decided on is I'm going to lay this thing like that. So we're actually not even using the profile face of the molding, we're using the back of it. We've got this nice deep cut line right there. We've got this round bead that I really love, and I think that makes for a great cap right there. So we're not going to put it flat like this, although that would work as well. But the problem with that is we would be sticking out past our back band here, and that's just simply not going to work. So what I'm going to do, rather than lay this flat, is I'm just going to simply pitch it up. So I'll have it in this kind of exterior fashion, right? Because if water was coming down the side, it would need to run off. So I think that's also a cool element for this Greek revival. It's kind of real temple looking, like it's exterior. So that solves two problems for me. It looks really nice, kind of brings this molding up a little bit more in height and makes it chunkier looking. And then also saves me from having it sticking out past my back band. So I'll get as close as I can get right there with a good reveal, and then I can mark that right there. So with that marked, I can pull a level line across here and then see where our next little block needs to go. If you remember when we did this pencil molding application, we had to put blocks in where our moldings would turn. It's going to be the exact same thing here. So wherever that line levels off over here, I need another block to fill in this voided space. So I'll level this off and see what our block needs to be. So it looks like we need a 3/4 inch block that is, remember this from last time too, it's going to be 1 inch by 1 inch. Yep, 1 by 1 by 3/4. So our block will drop right on there. I'll just level up with my block here and mark over. And I know that pencil line is also where the top of it needs to sit over here. So we'll be level across, we'll have the same reveal and the same pitch, because just like crown molding, this is going to be like a upside down crown molding right here. And we need to know exactly where it's going to sit. So we are ready to cut our picture molding, and you'll notice on this, or maybe you won't depending on what the camera picks up, but you can see when I hold this in position here, I have probably like a 1/16 gap between molding and panel. And to solve that, and the reason that's there actually is because this is, you know, like an 1/8 inch little lip right there. I need to smooth that out. And to solve it, I'm going to use a little low angle block plane. So then it can sit as tight as it can up against that. A little bit of handwork, maybe took me a couple minutes, but now this thing should sit flush. I'm good with my reveal here on the back band. So with this long piece in place, I can mark the top corner of my block. Bam. And I made this piece long enough that I can do both. And of course, mark this one as well. Okay, now the fun part. Cutting this on a projection. How are we going to do that? Let me show you. Figure this out, it's actually fairly simple. All we need to know is the lowest point, which is the top of our cove here, and the highest point, which is our pencil line. So that is where exactly our molding is sitting. So we'll take a tape and we'll measure that, and that is getting us at 1.25 inches. So we'll make an 1¼ inch block for our Kaizen fence. So I've just cut this 1¼ inch block here, and this is going to be our setup block. And we're going to put this right here. We're going to grab our little stop here. Those are stored up there. Then we can slide our T-track up, drop on our block, and there's a knob to tighten it in the back. So that's set up. That thing's not going anywhere. These spin actually whenever you bring in your piece. Like here's my piece. Obviously, when it registers off something straight, it'll flatten out. Also, for this is a 5mm hole. So you could use shelf pins, which is actually what I use a lot out in the field. So we'll do the same thing over here. Put that little stop in, and then take our block, raise up our track, and lock it in. And just like that, we are ready to cut. We are in that projection. So we don't even have to think about it. We can get right on our pencil line. This thing is gonna wrap that corner, and it's gonna look sweet. So let's make these cuts. And make sure we can glue it. Bam! That looks amazing. Look at that profile. How it just chunks this thing up. Just simple natural shapes, coves and circles, little slight pitch right here. Dang, that looks good. We're lining up with our cove underneath as far as miter. And we are flat right here to accept our pencil molding. And we'll pre-assemble this to hold that projection in place, since this is gonna wanna fall down. And this sucker is ready to go in. Dang. That's an awesome profile. I mean, this is what I'm talking about. If you get creative with this stuff, have your inspirations, of course, but also like this was just me coming in here with my Windsor bag and being like, I don't know, let's just check every piece and see what works, and just having that picture molding. Like we went from this to that just by turning it on its face. Like no one ever intended to use the back of this. But for us to take advantage of it, I mean, look how good that looks. We have this cool little pitch. We have this fat bead right here, this cove, all from this, using the back of moldings. That's crazy. I think that's a good place to end it right here. It's coming together. I mean, we are gonna do this. We're gonna execute on this, and it is gonna be, it's gonna be something special. So we'll pick it up in the next video, and then we can start building up our little cornice for our mantle shelf top. So we're getting into the actual mantle now, which is crazy to say. There's so much work that goes into the wainscot, to the side panels, and you know, the little surround. We're gonna start on the real mantle next time. So thank you so much for watching, guys. I really appreciate you following along. I know this is kind of for the diehards. This is like getting into the nitty-gritty stuff of moldings and architectural millwork. But if you love it just as much as me, then that's probably why you're here, and that's why I keep making these videos. So thank you for watching them, and I'll see you guys on the next one.